How to put your crossbow away for the winter. That's this episode of Death by Bunjie. Bunjie and I have just completed our 7th hunting season together, if you can believe that. 7 different years of hunting with a crossbow ever since 2010. I've been hunting with Bunjie here. It is a 2010 Excalibur Axiom. This crossbow performs just as well today as it did when it was brand new, and one of the reasons for that is I try to take care of it to make sure that it's prepared for every hunting season. The late season is over. I did have an opportunity to go out there and hunt a little bit. Never did get a doe here in Pennsylvania, never did get a deer in the late season. Ended up with a cold the last week of the late season, which is pretty common it seems, but it is the way it is, and that's where we're at right now. I can tell you though that this crossbow, given the opportunity, would have performed just fine in the late season. I'm confident about that. So I wanted to make a video just before I put Bunjie away for the winter to show you sort of the steps that I go through with the crossbow to make sure that it is going to survive the storage part of its life just fine. One of the things I like to do with the crossbow when I am done, when I'm ready to put it away for the season, I take an air compressor and I go through and I blow out some of the areas in here that you can't quite reach with Q-tips, stuff that you can't reach with a cloth. I go through and I blow out the air there, blow out the air around the scope, through the trigger mechanism, blow some air through there. You can use compressed air, you can use an air compressor, but it cleans out any debris that might be in there, sort of get it out of the way so that it's not going to lay in there and gum up the works. Make sure you clean out the flight groove as well here on the shooting rail. Clean that groove out and get any dust and dirt out of there. Then I go through and I wipe it down with scent-free wipes. The same scent-free wipes that you get from Hunter Specialties or from Dead Downwind, any of those companies. Go through and I wipe down the stock, I wipe down all the dust off of it, clean the outside of the scope, not the lens, but I clean the outside of the scope with those, go through, hit the limbs real good, clean the stirrup, and make sure all of the dirt, all of the debris is off of the crossbow. This is a great time to go through your crossbow, go around your crossbow, and make sure all those bolts and all those screws and all those nuts are tight. Go through with your Allen wrenches and just snug up everything. Make sure that the scope is properly affixed to the crossbow. Another important thing is to check and make sure the limbs are bolted down. Now you can wiggle those limbs and feel if there is any give in those, if there's any play up here where these bolts need to be tightened up. If they do, let's make sure they're nice and tight. Now, some people had asked me, what about oiling the nuts and bolts? Which ones do you oil? When you put a little bit of oil on there, just a little dab or two of crossbow oil on each one of those screw heads or nut heads, you'll end up just protecting it a little bit so that they don't rust. Which ones do I do? It's simple. I do all of them. I go through and every little nut that I see, every little metal screw or nut head that I see or little bolt, I go through and I put just a little dab or two on there and make sure that it looks like it's covering the entire surface area. And you'll notice over a period of time you don't get any rust, you don't get any tarnish on there if you do that. If you've hunted in the rain, if you've hunted in bad weather and brought the crossbow back inside, even if you dry it off properly, you can still end up with some rust on those heads. So that's why I go through and do that. While we're on the subject of crossbow oil, I take that little needle and I put a little bit of oil in the safety mechanism, put a little bit of oil in the trigger assembly, just to make sure that those are getting properly oiled. Then work the safety real good, work the trigger a little bit. Don't have to go out and shoot it necessarily, but go through and make sure that that oil's spread around good, and you should be good to go. Those of you with compound crossbows, make sure you oil those pulleys and make sure you work them a little bit to work that oil in. Just a couple of drops up there is all it really needs, but make sure you do that as well. Another note about crossbow oil. A couple people have asked me, can you use like silicone lubricants? Can you use WD-40, other products like that for your crossbow? Those products may work perfectly. I don't know. I don't use those. Excalibur sells a product called crossbow oil, and that is all I use when I am lubricating this crossbow. I'm not going to use WD-40 because it has an odor, first of all, that a deer may pick up on if I'm out in the woods with it. And I don't want that to happen. In addition to that, in addition to the odor, Crossbow oil is specifically made for crossbows. It's what manufacturers recommend. As I've always said on here, stick with what your manufacturer recommends. You can't go wrong. They know more about what's right for your crossbow than any other person on the internet, including me. So I stick with Excalibur's Crossbow oil for this. If your manufacturer recommends some other product, go ahead and feel free to use that, of course. Another thing I like to do with the crossbow before I put it away for the winter, if I'm not going to be hunting with it for a period of time, I like to take the string off. Now, you don't have to. Even Excalibur will tell you that leaving the string on there in those off-season months will not hurt your crossbow in any way. But to me, if I take the string off and allow those limbs to relax a little bit for another part of the season for a few months, if I'm not using the crossbow, it just seems to me it'll help those limbs last a little bit longer with no tension on them. Seems like a good idea to me, so I do that. A big question is, how soon will you be using that crossbow? Are you going to use it for spring gobbler? Are you going to go out for a spring boar hunt like I've done in the past with my daughter Genevieve? If you do that, you may not want to take the string off. May not be worth it. With a recurve crossbow, like Bunjie here, taking the string off is not really a problem. I can do it with a stringer. In fact, I'm going to do another video on that here shortly, so you'll see that probably next week. But it's easy for me to take that string off. If you have a compound crossbow with the pulleys, you're probably going to have to take it to a shop or get yourself a bow press in order to take that string off. Again, do you have to take the string off? That's your personal preference. I don't think your crossbow's necessarily going to suffer if you don't take that string off. It just seems like a good idea. If it's not too inconvenient to do it, why not? While we have that string off, if we take it off, let's inspect that string. Do we need a new string for next year? That's a good question. If not, maybe you need to get the current string reserved. Now would be a good time to do that. You got the string off, you don't need it for a little while. Only takes your shop a couple of days to give you that string back. Look at your cables as well on your compound crossbows, because those cables eventually will wear out. Might cost you some money to get all that stuff replaced, but now is the time to do it if it needs it. Two of my strings between the time of the second crossbow season, or the rifle season here in Pennsylvania, and between the time of the late season. There was a couple of weeks there. It only took them a couple of days to put a new serving on there, so I'm good to go. That way you've got that prepared. So now's a good time to do that as well. Inspect that string and see if that needs any maintenance. As long as we're talking about strings, now is a good time to wax that string. And in fact, if you take the string off, you might want to unravel it a little bit, wax the interior of the string, roll it back up. Now, putting the string back on after you've unraveled a little bit, after you've added wax to the interior of the string, that may affect your accuracy, but anytime we're taking the string off and putting it back on, we're obviously going to go through the sighting in regimen when we get ready next year. So when we put the string back on at the start of next season, we're going to spend an afternoon sighting in the crossbow, making sure that the string performs perfectly when it is replaced. So that will affect that a little bit, but it's still worth doing. Another option for maintenance when you're taking that string off, however, if you want to maintain the accuracy so that when you put the string back on, it's really close to where it was when you took it off, take some paper clips and gently put those on the string so it doesn't unravel, or some bread twist ties, things like that. You can put them on there and then store that string in a Ziploc bag so that when you put it back on, it's going to have approximately the same number of twists. String stretch will affect your elevation of your shot up and down, and the number of twists will affect the windage, the left and right of your shot. So those two things, as long as you take care of that, wax the string good, that'll cut down on the stretch, but the other option is to make sure that you maintain the same number of wraps in the string, twists in the string. And if you do that, it should be pretty accurate, pretty close when you put it back together next year. I've never had any problems. In fact, I put this string on one year. After I took it off, put the string back on, I think I was off by ½ an inch or something like that with every shot. It was so easy to put it back together. So it's not that hard to do that if you do decide to take those strings off. While we're taking off the string, do we want to take off the limbs to give the dissipator pads a little bit of rest. Now that's a legitimate question. I guess it's up to you. I've never done that. I don't take the dissipator pads off. I don't take I don't take the limbs off. And it might be that I'm due next year for new dissipator pads. I will look into that and I will see if I need new dissipator pads on the front end of this. If I do, I'll replace them before I put the string back on. Before you put it away, let's get that scope cleaned up if it's been a while. Get your lens brush out and wipe down the lens good. And then after you've got that cleaned off, use your alcohol wipes to clean it up, a little bit of fresh breath and a clean cloth to go through there. Clean that lens out so nothing gets caked on there, so that next year it'll be nice and clean and ready to go. This is also a good time to check over your arrows. Do you need to get your arrows refletched? Some of your fletchings may be coming off or they may be torn. If they are, now is a good time to take them to a shop, get them replaced. Look over your arrows and see if there's any cracks in them. Do they need to be discarded, thrown away? Now lastly, now that we've got the crossbow all ship shape, we've got it oiled, we've got the scope clean, we've got the string prepared properly, and perhaps the string has been taken off, what do we do with it until next year? Well, there's a couple different things you can do. Number one, I really recommend you store it indoors. Some people I've talked to store them outdoors. If that works for you, that's just fine. However, to me, this is just like a rifle to me. I would never store my rifle outdoors. I would only store it indoors in a somewhat climate-controlled environment. I store all my rifles in my father's old gun cabinet. That's right where they go. And I take them out periodically and I maintain them. And the same thing goes for my crossbow. After the maintenance is done, where do I store this? Typically, I store it in a nice safe place where it's not going to get bumped. I store it in a spare bedroom in the hard shell crossbow case. Think of it like a vampire in a coffin. It can sit for hundreds of years in a coffin somewhere, and then when it comes out, it's all refreshed and ready to go. I bring old Bunjie here out to make videos with it, so I need it handy. So another option is to hang it up somewhere where you can see it. Now I recommend you put that in a place where there's no traffic. Put it on a wall where you're not going to be walking by it and knocking it off. Put it up high enough that it is protected and out of the way. But you're free to display this thing somewhere where you're happy where you can see it. There are a variety of different ideas for wall mounts. You could try a guitar mount the same way you mount those guitars on the wall. I have a few of those and they would work just fine. You can hang it by the stirrup. On our Facebook page, Casey Davis showed me a really neat wall hanging system that he made, for example. It looks awesome. That's something I was really impressed with, and if you are handy, you might want to get into making something like that yourself. That's a great way to display your crossbow. Hanging a crossbow by the stirrup is not a problem at all. That stirrup's very durable. You might want to make sure the bolts are on there snug and everything, of course. But once you hang it up by the stirrup, that's not a problem at all. Well, I sure hope that this helps you maintain your crossbow so that you can enjoy it for years and years and years. Hope you got some information out of this and I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe to Death by Bunjie here on YouTube if you haven't done so already. Also, check out our Facebook page if you haven't done that. We have a lot of interesting conversations going on there about trail cameras and things like that. And until next time, all hail Bunjie!
The second state is #1 in my book.
The last thing I'll throw out there is this is also a good time to check over your arrows. Why don't you stay up there? No, I don't want you falling on me. Light's falling over. This is